Welcome to today's show. We have our guest, David Gola. And we're going to be talking about the works of Isaac the Syrian. And the topic, spiritual zealousness as a form of spiritual adolescence. What is the goal of spiritual life? Is the highest goal of spiritual life to be like a crusader knight, or to be a street preacher preaching, or to be so loud and be so seen, or is it to be more of a humble person? How do we really understand these concepts in the Orthodox faith? And just how should a religious person appear or act in day-to-day life? David Gola?
Well, you've got an awful lot tied up in that introductory comment, Vladimir. Isaac the Syrian is a remarkable church father, beautifully poetic, with an extraordinary gift for aphorisms, for putting the truth in this kernel. I have been interested, I suppose, for a long time in this curious phenomena of religious communities elevating, looking up to, being in liege to usually men, sometimes women, who struck me as people that were living off of their own passion.
Okay.
But that they had turned their passion into some kind of advantage within the religious community. This is an old story.
I can see that.
It's an old story. It's at the heart of all cult leaders.
Go on.
And at the heart of many politicians who do this as well.
No argument there.
So Isaac the Syrian, in one place in his extraordinary set of sermons on the ascetic life, he's really exploring the great spiritual struggles of human beings, the struggles with our passions, with our suffering. But in one of these sermons, he says that those who are zealous for the truth have not yet met the truth. Once they have met the truth, they will no longer have the compulsion to be zealous on behalf of the truth. So what's he getting at there? Many people assume that a kind of zealousness goes along with a serious religious conviction.
Mm-hmm.
Do we see zealousness in Jesus Christ? Do we see zealousness in his relationships to people? I suppose some people might want to pick up one or two narratives and make that argument. But in general, I think we see something else. We see him being amazingly present to the men and women that he meets, whether it's at the well, on the pathway, whether it's an encounter with the lawyers or the Pharisees, you don't normally see Jesus in a defensive posture. In fact, I think we could say that Jesus is never defending anything. We see him getting upset when he enters the temple.
Mm-hmm.
He's upset about the fact that his own parents, or many people from his own village, would have difficulty coming to the temple and being present at the temple on the Day of Atonement, because the temple structure had developed in such a way that it had made difficult for the poor to be present to the God of love, who sees them as the least of these, his children.
Mm-hmm.
So it has struck me for some time that zealousness is a common characteristic in human development.
Okay.
We see it vividly in 13-year-olds, in teenagers. Now, I love teenagers, don't get me wrong, and all my children have been teenagers, and God knows I was a teenager.
You've told me some stories. Yep.
And when I was a teenager, I was certainly zealous for what I understood to be theological accuracy and what have you.
Mm-hmm.
And there were times that I acted on that zealousness against others and argued with them. And it seemed to me, of course, I usually won the argument, but it never made any difference, except it deepened alienation.
Okay.
It deepened estrangement. So a certain kind of zealousness is important. A certain kind of zealousness is present in the whole process of maturation. Teenagers are typically quite zealous. Why? Because they're exploring the margins of identity.
Mm-hmm.
They're trying to discover who they are, over against. It's always over against. You rebel against your parents, you rebel against the school, whatever it is. You're trying to take your own measure. You're trying to understand who you are in light of institutions, in light of various kinds of authority. This is a good thing. It's a good thing in a teenager.
Mm-hmm.
But it's dreadful in adults. In fact, if it persists into adulthood, you have not become an adult. You have remained fixated in that period of your life, in a kind of, I call it a kind of spiritual adolescence. A spiritual adolescence is one in which a person imagines that they must defend the truth. They must defend God. They must lay down markers for what's significant. They must be the upholders of ultimate values. I never see that in the rabbi from the Nazareth. It's odd, huh? You certainly see the prophets in the Hebrew Bible reading the riot act to the king, to the pharaoh, to the emperor, to the priesthood within their own community. You see that kind of exercise of call, really. The way they normally do it is they're calling them to their better angels. They say, "What have you done? You've abandoned the widows and orphans." But zealousness, so often, isn't about calling people to their better angels. It's about condemning them because you disagree with them. So, spiritual adolescence is, of course, a tragedy because it is being fixated on your own understanding as if your own understanding was God's understanding.
Mm-hmm.
As if your own understanding was at the center of the world. So the Orthodox tradition, and St. Isaac is one of the great psychotherapists of this. He understood the way the human passions worked. And so he said that zealousness for the truth is a confession.
Go on.
If we listen carefully, this person is really revealing that he has not experienced the truth. Because what is the truth in the Christian tradition? In the Christian tradition, the truth is a person. The truth is the incarnation. The truth is Jesus Christ. He is the way. He is the truth. He is the life. His way of being is a revelation about how we as human beings have been created. Mm-hmm. We have all been created for communion. We've been created with the ability to be present to others, including our enemy. And that presence is healing. That presence always calls forth empathy where there was only enmity. That presence lays a new table. As the psalmist says, "Thou preparest a table before me in the presence of my enemies. Thou anointest me with oil. Yea, though I walk through the valley of the shadow of death, I will fear no evil." So where there is zealousness, there is fear. And one who has met the truth is freed from fear and freed from desire and able to be in the stance of communing presence